Sí. Bueno, muy buenas tardes. Es un placer estar aquí. ¿Fuerte? Millones de habitantes y un territorio de 1.098.000 kilómetros aproximadamente. Este territorio contiene una diversidad entre valles, entre altiplano y selvas, y es un país con 36 nacionalidades, con 36 comunidades de pueblos indígenas. Ahora un país plurinacional, considerando que un 62% de la población hasta el censo 2001 se asume como de extracción indígena.
Hello everyone. Maybe I should just say that this is how we're going to interpret. I'll let her speak for a while and then I'll interpret. I don't want to do it every 2 or 3 sentences. Hello everyone, good evening. It's a pleasure to be here among you. Bolivia is a country of some 9 million people with an area of some 1 million square kilometers, made up of valleys, high plains, jungles, 36 nationalities, indigenous groupings. We can say that it's a pluri-ethnic or plurinational country with 62% of the country in the 2001 census identifying itself as indigenous extraction.
Bueno, esta es una primera introducción a lo que les voy a comentar de lo que sucede en Bolivia, porque creemos que es necesario conocer un poquito cuál es la realidad. Para darle un poquito de continuidad a lo que nos ha dicho María, Bolivia es uno de los países más pobres de América Latina, con la mayor tasa de mortalidad infantil y analfabetismo, en contraste con las pocas familias que, con una fortuna, concentran la mayor parte de las tierras y de los recursos naturales del país. Durante el proceso neoliberal, esta concentración ha sido muchísimo mayor, sobre todo en épocas de dictadura. Y esto lo retomo porque justamente María nos hablaba de la preocupación que hay actualmente sobre el tema de la seguridad de América Latina con respecto a Estados Unidos, en tanto el problema que estamos viviendo en este momento no es algo muy nuevo, es algo que se ha venido dando a lo largo de la historia. Primero un golpe, un estado de shock, como dice la autora Naomi Klein, y después empezamos a sacar todas las medidas económicas que nos convienen a nosotros y no a la mayoría.
So I just wanted to say that to introduce what Bolivia is. We should have a fairly good idea of what its reality is. And I want to be somewhat in continuity with what Maria was saying. Bolivia is the poorest country in Latin America, where the rate of child mortality and illiteracy is the highest. And we have a very small elite which owns most of the country's land and natural resources. Under neoliberalism, the concentration of wealth has been exacerbated even further, especially during periods of dictatorship. Again, to keep in continuity with what Maria was saying, we are, of course, very worried about the security of Latin America in relation to the United States. But these problems, of course, are new. They're very much a legacy that's been passed down to us by history. And we have seen time and time again there have been coups which have opened up a period where, as Naomi Klein has said, the governments could implement measures, shock treatment type measures, to implement a whole series of economic measures that further benefited the wealthy elites in the country.
Bien, con este proceso neoliberal que se ha vivido en América Latina, Bolivia ha incrementado la pobreza producto de la privatización y de la falta de una articulación entre una economía campesina y una economía globalizada. Una descredibilidad de los partidos políticos, un sistema político dual en donde tenemos una política parlamentaria y una política que se hace en las calles, unas ideas fuerzas sobre el proceso de nacionalización de los recursos y una necesidad de autogobierno indígena desde el punto de vista de la necesidad de una reivindicación identitaria. Por lo tanto, producto también de este modelo neoliberal, tenemos un Estado monoétnico, monocultural, que eleva los índices del racismo y unas movilizaciones de comunidades indígenas históricas que se dan inicio a partir del año 2000.
So with the neoliberal process of neoliberalism in Latin America, poverty has increased massively through a process of privatization primarily, but also through the inability of the system to match what is essentially a peasant economy with the globalization of the economy that has been continuing apace. This has created a system where you have political parties that have no credibility, that have no real roots in the country, a kind of dualism where on the one hand there's the politics that takes place in parliament, and on the other hand you have the politics that takes place in the streets, and in the streets there has been a strong demand for the nationalization of the country's resources, for self-government in the interests of the country's indigenous populations and the different identities of the indigenous peoples. So as a result of this, what has occurred is that you have a kind of a mono-ethnic or monocultural state on the one hand, which has deepened racism tremendously in the country, and in response to this, you have had, since the year 2000 especially, a massive mobilization of the country's indigenous peoples.
Bien, estos movimientos sociales empiezan a cobrar fuerza y se ocasiona históricamente tres rupturas. La primera durante la revolución del 52, que llega a ser una revolución frustrada porque los sujetos, los protagonistas de esta revolución no lograron lo que realmente demandaban, la tierra para quien la trabaja, primero. Y a pesar de que se inicia la reforma agraria, todas estas parcelas, todas estas tierras son entregadas en dotación a grandes terratenientes, lo que frustra definitivamente que las comunidades indígenas puedan tener su derecho a la tierra. Segundo, el movimiento de 1990 que tiene que ver con una marcha por la dignidad de todas las organizaciones desde el oriente, que es la zona más afectada, producto de este tipo de reforma agraria que se implementó con el plan Bohan y que dio crecimiento a unos cuantos terratenientes. Termino con esto. Tercer punto de quiebre es la guerra del agua y la guerra del gas. Esto tiene que ver con una lucha que va más allá de un momento en el cual la gente está separada de toda la comunicación con la zona urbana. Es decir, producto de este modelo neoliberal, la gente migra. Hace 25 años atrás, 65% de la población boliviana vivía en el área rural. Eso se invirtió. Ese 65% vive en el área urbana. Cuando surge la guerra del gas, la guerra por nacionalizar los hidrocarburos, la gente sale a pelear y en la ciudad es reprimida por los militares. Ante este hecho increíble, la gente se levanta y con una piedra es capaz de lograr lo que ninguna constitución del mundo dice, que con una piedra se bajó un presidente. En su lucha por la reivindicación de su dignidad, en su lucha por el derecho a vivir.
So these social movements have gained force, and we can really break down the history of the origin of these social movements into three main periods of break or rupture. In 1952, there was a revolution which we can describe as a frustrated revolution, because the true objectives of the revolutionary movement were not met. The main objectives were land for those who work the land. There was an agrarian reform, but the agrarian reform ended up actually handing the lands to the country's big landowners and did not give the right to the land to the country's indigenous population. The second moment, or the second period of break or rupture or rise in force of these social movements was in 1990, where there was a huge movement in the eastern zones of the country, those very same eastern zones where the population was most affected by this failed land reform in which land was handed to the country's elites as a result of the Bohan law. This was a major mobilization of the population in the eastern part of the country. The third chapter came with the water or gas wars, which was a huge struggle that grew up in the urban zones, but was actually the product of the massive migration into the cities that has taken place over the last 25 years. Some 25 years ago, 65% of the population was based in the rural areas, But in the last 25 years, this has been reversed. So now 65% of the population now lives in urban areas. So when the campaign started the movement started to nationalize the country's gas and water resources, and there were huge demonstrations, and these demonstrations were put down massively in the cities by the army. This provoked a massive rebellion across the country, and the idea was born that one stone could bring down a president. One stone thrown in the cause of dignity and the right to a decent life was enough to spark a much broader movement which brought down 2 presidents.
Entonces tenemos una situación en donde la demanda principal es nacionalizar los hidrocarburos, devolver este recurso natural al pueblo. Por lo tanto, se llama a una asamblea constituyente. Se dice, nosotros queremos hacer las nuevas reglas del juego. Ustedes nos han engañado. Cuando hubo la revolución del 52 les entregamos el poder, pero ustedes no cambiaron, ustedes no mintieron. Entonces, en 1990, la gente marcha y dice, bueno, basta ya, queremos una nueva ley, una asamblea constituyente. Entonces, cuando sube Evo Morales, sube porque la gente de clase media ya no tiene mayor credibilidad en los partidos políticos, ya no cree en ellos y quiere un cambio, ya está cansada de la corrupción. Éramos el segundo país, subcampeones de la corrupción. Entonces tenemos un país que de pronto está exigiendo ya desde abajo un cambio. Este cambio lo hace Evo Morales cuando convoca a una asamblea, cuando nacionaliza los hidrocarburos y luego cuando llama a una asamblea constituyente, que desde todo punto de vista deseaba ser bloqueada por la oposición en Bolivia, compuesta por partidos políticos tradicionales y por los terratenientes que se beneficiaron mucho durante gobiernos dictatoriales, gobiernos de facto, sin rendir cuentas a nadie de sus posesiones. Cuando se instala la Asamblea Constituyente, surgen inmediatamente 3 obstáculos. Los 2/3, la ley de los 2/3, la ley de convocatoria, el tema de la autonomía y el tema de la capitalidad. El primer tema que tiene que ver con intentar poner candados al hecho de que la gran mayoría que había sido elegida desde el MAS pudiera tomar las decisiones por sí misma, por el solo hecho de ser mayoría. Por lo tanto, había que bloquear eso y decir que solo eran aprobados los artículos si 2/3 de los partidos realmente estaban de acuerdo, entraban en un consenso. Esa fue la primera ley que quiso obstaculizar el avance de la Asamblea Constituyente. El tema de la autonomía fue un pedido que después hemos podido ver a través de los estatutos autonómicos que ellos sacaron, que querían ser una mini república. Ellos querían manejar su policía, ellos querían decir quién tiene la ciudadanía. Y la última, el tema de la capitalidad, que jugaron a través de los medios de comunicación con una demanda legítima del pueblo. Sucre quería volver a ser capital porque había sido abandonado por mucho tiempo y decía, ya no queremos más pobreza, ya no queremos más atraso, tómennos en cuenta. Era una demanda legítima, pero lo que hicieron los grupos de poder fue utilizar esto para generar mayor violencia junto a grupos de choque de la juventud cruceñista e impedir que se llevara a cabo la entrega del nuevo texto constitucional.
So the main demand that emerged was to nationalize the country's gas and oil reserves so that these resources would work on behalf of the people. And this went hand in hand with a demand for a new constituent assembly. The people were saying, we want to set the rules. We want to write the laws of this country. We have given you the opportunity in the past to do this. You have cheated us. For example, in 1952, you lied to us. Enough is enough. We want a new constituent assembly where we can write our own laws and rules. And this is where, and Evo Morales came from this process. Evo Morales also came from the anger, the exhaustion of a middle class which no longer believed in the country's traditional parties, which was sick of Bolivia being the civil medal holder of corruption in the world, which was therefore open to the idea of nationalizing the country's natural resources and doing so through a constituent assembly process. But at every step of the way, the opposition has blocked this process, blocked this demand. Of course, the main, and has been blocked by the traditional parties and the landowners who have historically benefited from the inequality of power and wealth in the country, and who always benefited most from the different dictatorial regimes that have existed in the country. So the Constituent Assembly process came up against three main obstacles. The first was what is known as the 2/3 law. The second is the demand for autonomy in some of the country's regions. And the third demand is to transfer the capital city from La Paz to Sucre. So I'll speak to you about each one of these obstacles. The first one has to do with the 2/3 law. And the idea was that even though a large majority in the population had mobilized in support of the nationalization of the country's resources and in support of the Constituent Assembly, the opposition said that, no, we cannot go ahead unless we have a 2/3 majority for every decision taken by the Constituent Assembly. This was a way that they threw up an obstacle to the process moving forward. The second one had to do with autonomy, and the demand emerged for what could be called mini republics. The wealthier regions wanted their own police force, wanted to be able to determine who would be the citizens of their mini republics. They wanted to grab more control in their regions in this fashion. And the third one, the capital city demand, was given tremendous airplay by the media, and it was a way that the traditional parties and the entrenched elite used what could be described as a legitimate demand, that is, the demand for Sucre, which was historically the capital city of Bolivia, but that had been abandoned for a long time. People in that area said, we've been abandoned, we are living in poverty. It's a legitimate concern, it's a legitimate demand given the state of Sucre. But what happened was this legitimate demand was taken over by the traditional elites and the media and manipulated and used to mobilize against the consensus around the Constituent Assembly and the nationalization process, including the mobilization of the far-right cruceño groups in the Santa Cruz region.
Okay. Lo de Sucre fue también una estrategia, porque no toda la gente estaba involucrada, pero a través de los medios lo que se dijo fue: nos están atacando, nos vienen a quitar el canal. Un canal de televisión universitaria que se prestó a los servicios del Comité Interinstitucional. Hay un video de un argentino que estuvo presente y que pudo filmar todo este nivel de racismo que se presentaba, ¿no? Y nosotros estuvimos cerca en ese momento, pudimos ver a las hordas de jóvenes que tomaban la ciudad. La gran mayoría de la gente de Sucre es sumamente pacífica, pero en este tiempo los medios lograron convulsionar y dar a entender una realidad que realmente no existía, porque los grupos de choque fueron traídos desde Santa Cruz, no de ahí mismo. Dos, una vez que termina esto y se amplía el plazo para la entrega de la nueva constitución, los constituyentes se reúnen en un cuartel, en un liceo que queda dentro de Sucre para no romper la ley, y luego salen hasta Oruro a riesgo de correr peligro sus vidas, porque eran los golpes, eran las amenazas, y lamentablemente Sucre en ese momento era tierra propiedad del Comité Interinstitucional, de los cívicos. Salen los constituyentes a la ciudad de Oruro y a las 6 de la tarde de un día domingo, se sesiona en Oruro durante toda la noche, y a la mañana siguiente, a las 12 del mediodía, se logra entregar el texto constitucional con presencia de quórum. Esto es, no fue lo que avisaron los medios, que era una constitución totalmente ilegal. Se basó en una resolución interna que se hizo dentro de la Asamblea Constituyente a través de consenso entre mayoría y minoría. Cuando se llevó a cabo la asamblea era totalmente legal. Cuando terminó la aprobación era totalmente legal. Cuando se entregó el texto y vinieron las comunidades indígenas a hacer vigilia, se tenía ya el elemento, la carta que iba a ser la base para una nueva constitución en Bolivia. Luego se hizo la entrega oficial al presidente Evo Morales. No sé si puedo continuar, esta parte me emociona mucho.
Okay. So the whole question of Sucre was a very deliberate strategy, because not everyone in Sucre agreed with with what was done. The media blew out of all proportion the campaign in Sucre, and it had to do with a program that was shown on a university channel where an Argentinian filmmaker was present and was able to show how racist the opposition was. And we ourselves were there, and we saw how the groups of youth shock troops were brought in, especially from the Santa Cruz region, were brought in to intimidate and harass and attack those who had assembled for the Constituent Assembly in Sucre. You should know that the Sucre population itself is peaceful, but because of the shock groups brought in from elsewhere and the role of the media, they were able to present an entirely different image of Sucre and its population and its relationship to the Constituent Assembly and the constitutional process. So what happened when the new constitution was being drawn up is that there was a meeting in Sucre, at a high school in Sucre, but the people who had gathered there had to flee for their lives because they had faced threats and actual physical attacks. This is where I get a bit confused. But in the city of Oruro, they gathered at Sunday at 6 p.m. to continue their deliberations. And these deliberations continued until the next day, Monday at noon.
Began at 6. Began at
6 p.m., yes. 6 p.m. Sunday, and they went until Monday at noon, and they had quorum in spite of all the chaos and events that had taken place and the threats and so forth. They had quorum to vote ratify the new constitution, which as a result of an internal resolution based on a majority and minority positions. So the outcome was a legal one. It was a legitimate one. And so when so when it all finished, it was a legal and legitimate process. When the indigenous communities came to support and protect the institution that had carried out this process, they had together indeed created the basis for a new constitution. And so when this document was finally officially delivered to Evo Morales, it was the outcome of this entirely legal and legitimate process that I've described. And I get very emotional when I talk about this. I don't know if I'm going to be able to continue.
Bueno, cuando se entrega la nueva constitución hay un consenso, según informes del PNUD, del 85% tanto de fuerza mayoritaria como minoritaria. Esto es el 85% de toda la constitución fue consensuado, fue aprobado por ambas fuerzas. Esto hace que se presente la discusión entre los prefectos y el gobierno sobre cuáles van a ser las competencias que se van a aplicar, porque no están de acuerdo con las competencias de las que habla la nueva constitución. Las competencias de la nueva constitución indican autonomía sí, para ti, pero también para ti, y entre todos me consensúan. Not only for one, for all. Entonces, los de la autonomía departamental, los prefectos dicen no, eso no nos conviene. Y ellos dicen aparte que la renta dignidad que se paga a los abuelos, only $25, no se puede dar. ¿Por qué? Porque eso es un recorte demasiado grande para las prefecturas, a pesar que con la nacionalización de los hidrocarburos, el IDH hizo que triplicaran sus ingresos. No quieren dar el 30% para sustentar la renta dignidad que mantenga a nuestros abuelos con una vida digna en el país. Y por lo tanto, ellos dicen, vamos a hacer nosotros nuestros propios estatutos autonómicos y convocan al referéndum por los estatutos. Al ver que los estatutos no tuvieron éxito, dicen, bueno, el 4 de mayo llegó y no se cayó el mundo. no pudimos ejecutar los estatutos porque no somos gobierno y los países del exterior no quieren transar con nosotros como departamento. Dice, yo país exporto con tu gobierno, no contigo, no con una ciudad. Por lo tanto, no se puede llevar a cabo todo lo que prometimos. Vamos entonces a un liderazgo a nivel nacional. Arriesgamos por un referéndum revocatorio para moverle el piso al presidente. Pero eso denotó que la oposición empezó a quebrarse, que no era una unidad fuerte, real. Era una oposición de grupos que peleaba al mismo modo que había vivido siempre, como haciendo sus pataletas para agarrarse de los recursos naturales sin rendirle cuentas a nadie. Sí, ya terminó. Bueno, y así en las preguntas me preguntan qué hizo Ébola.
Okay, so I described with great emotion the process and how the Constitution was drawn up. The United Nations, the UNDP itself said that 85% of the constitutional document was actually reached through consensus, agreed with by all sides. But this is when the debate started. The governors or the prefects started arguing with the central government, saying that we don't agree on jurisdictional questions. You know, who has control of what. And the central government said, well, there's autonomy, but it's autonomy for everyone, not just for one region. And the prefects or the governors themselves said that they weren't even able to pay, with the level of jurisdiction they were given, they weren't even able to pay the $25 per month for old age pension for seniors. They said it was too much for them to handle, and this in spite of the fact that their revenues had increased threefold thanks to the nationalization of the hydrocarbons and the resources in the country. That in spite of that, these prefects, these governors, weren't able to give this basic dignity to the seniors in their districts. So the question of autonomy opened up the whole matter of the recall referendum. When May 4th came around, and I'm not sure what May 4th refers to, but when May 4th came, the central government could say, you see, the world did not come to an end under the current arrangements, and the prefects responded that, well, the governments and the companies of the world don't see us as a legitimate government in spite of the degree of autonomy we've achieved. They don't want to deal with a single region or a single city, so as a result, we can't deliver to the populations that are in our jurisdiction. And so they decided to make a national issue, and this is why they went for the recall referendum, which took place on August 10th. And as you know, the recall referendum was a failure. And so we were able to see that the opposition started coming apart at the seams, and that in fact the opposition was made up merely of a number of squabbling groups who have, as traditionally has been the case, have only been interested in each one of them getting their hands on the different resources in their different regions, and unable to put up a united front against the Morales government. And if you like, I can speak to you now about the achievements of the Morales government.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's an honor to speak to this audience. You have among you such an assembly of experience and solidarity work here in Canada on various issues, and to speak after such distinguished representatives of the people of Venezuela and Bolivia as Maria and Cynthia. And I will be quite brief. This is a look at these events from a Canadian point of view. Now, Evo Morales won the recall referendum with 67%. Now that is almost twice as much as Stephen Harper got in the last elections. So you might think that Stephen Harper would have addressed a word of congratulation to Evo Morales, and perhaps even a question as to how he does it. But there is not a word heard from Ottawa. There was a word heard from Caracas. The Venezuelan government celebrated the victory of the Bolivian people by, together with Iran, donating a $225 million cement factory to Bolivia. With which the Bolivian government can provide cement for a popular housing program across the country. Now this was done by Venezuela, which is a country in which there is an enormous shortage of cement. The reason is because they have 2 million, an urgent need for 2 million new houses in Venezuela. It's been there for a long time. What's new is they're going to do something about it. And that's why they nationalized the cement plants, as Maria described. They're going to massively expand the production of cement for the local market. The story about the white roofs and the green roofs, not there anymore. I was in those hills too. The roofs now are every color, but mostly they're orange. Why orange? Because orange is the color of the building material supplied by the Popular Mission that looks after reconstruction of workers' housing. That means it's neighborhood committees that get all this orange building material and spread it. Could be. Home construction in Venezuela is planned and supervised on a local level by communal councils. There's more than 30,000 of them in Venezuela. They make arrangements to do things for a cheaper cost and in a better way, and housewives in Venezuela are trained and given diplomas in home inspection so that they can supervise the construction of the houses in which they and their neighbors are going to live. Why can't Canada come up with any programs as imaginative as this? What's wrong with us in Canada? The main things they do in Bolivia and Venezuela are such simple things, like water. You know, in the whole KI Indigenous community in Northern Ontario, there's not one of 30 communities that have safe drinking water. But in Bolivia and Venezuela, that's a priority. How come they can do that and we can't? They are working for free access to health and education for all. They are working to make unused land available for those who wish to farm. There is much unused land in Ontario, but it's not made available to young farmers. They are raising moderately the government's portion of oil revenues and using the proceeds to expand social programs. You know the story here. For Latin America, these are daring proposals. The region has gone through a vicious phase of capitalism in which social programs, as Maria described, were canceled. Nationalized property was sold off for a song, and national independence was sacrificed to serve the profits of the giant corporations. The people of Venezuela and Bolivia have set about to reverse this process. This has brought them up against the fanatical and violent opposition of the traditional elites and their backers in the United States and Canada. The right-wing oligarchy uses violence to defy the outcome of democratic elections. And they've safeguarded democracy by building mass movements that give effective expression to the popular will. Bolivia is a country where colonialist apartheid is exerted against the indigenous majority, as Cynthia described. Now that majority is demanding respect, equality, and recognition for its culture and its rights. In Venezuela, working people built a web of popular committees and programs to implement social programs. And their ultimate goal is to make these committees into the embryo of a new people state. We are seeing the first stages of a revolution. The oppressed and marginalized have forcefully intervened to change the direction of political and social life. And the most radical feature of this process is that it's being done internationally by Venezuela, Bolivia, and their allies in Latin America, and by Latin America as a whole, as the people of the region make allies in other continents and unite to push the United States and the Canadian government too out of their affairs. Leaders of Bolivia and Venezuela, and Cuba we must add, are speaking out on behalf of the world's oppressed peoples. Hugo Chavez has campaigned boldly against the aggressive wars of the U.S. government. A member of Toronto Bolivia Solidarity had a discussion with Judy Rebick a while back with Evo Morales. That was Judy Rebick, and it's in the pamphlet on Bolivia that's over there on the table. And Evo Morales said to her, if I can find the page, "The model that concentrates all capital in the hands of a few is destroying the planet Earth. It's headed towards destroying humanity. And from Bolivia, we can make a modest contribution to defend life, to save our humanity. That's our responsibility. These peoples represent new hope for Canada, an example for Canada's own future. Given our wealth, our education, the skills we have, the strength of our labor movement, we are in an even better position to make a contribution to the world. For that, we must build a Canadian equivalent of the movements in Latin America and join hands with our sisters and brothers in the global South in a world struggle for 21st century socialism. What happens there affects our future here. How can we act on this? Firstly, by learning from their struggle, from their ideas, and from their social and political imagination. Second, by spreading the word far beyond our numbers here tonight, to the progressive community and beyond. And we must also defend these struggles. Their enemies in Washington are actively preparing to crush them. Ottawa is helping to smooth the path, as it did so scandalously in preparing the coup in Haiti. The struggle in Bolivia and Venezuela is our struggle, and in that spirit, I invite you all to become active, to get information here tonight, and become active in one of the committees sponsoring this meeting, the Louis Riel Bolivarian Circle, the Manuelita Science Bolivarian Circle, the Venezuela We Are With You Committee Coalition, and Toronto Bolivia Solidarity. Thank you very much.